Okay. Are we on? Test?
Didn't start yet?
Test works. Okay. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. This is Grant Cameron. I want to do a presentation, and it's called The President's Book of Secrets. And the idea for this came a couple of weeks ago when I suddenly discovered that there was actually a book written on the president's daily briefing. And over the years, I've worked on the presidents and I've filed FOIAs to try to get the president's daily briefing. And I found there was a book, so I got the book. And then another incident happened is Donald Trump canceled the security clearance for John Brennan. And that was the second piece that I added in here, and it's a fairly major piece. So we're going to go through this. What does the president know about UFOs? Is the president told what's going on? This is just sort of a spin-off on the book called The President's Book of Secrets. And here it is. It's written by Dr. David Price. And he was a presidential briefer, not to the president, but to high level. The president's daily briefing is a top secret briefing that is given every morning, depending upon how the president wants it delivered to the president. And it's also given to a number of high level officials. So it may be given to the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, National Security Advisor. And so Priest briefed not the president, but these other high-level people. And he wrote this book talking about this presidential briefing that's given every morning through all the years from Roosevelt on. And what I found in this book was a number of things. I thought I knew quite a bit about how this is done, but there was a number of things that are kind of new, and I wanted to sort of present them. And then I'll bring this thing with the former CIA director, John Brennan, and what happened there. It's been sort of written up in movies. National Treasure 2 talked about the president's Book of Secrets. And there's actually presidents who have actually talked about it, made jokes about it. In 2009, Michael Shmerkonich from CNN asked Obama about National Treasure 2. And basically, he asked Obama, he said, you know, my kids have seen the movie, and I just want to know, have you seen the president's Book of Secrets? And Obama says, yes, I have. And then he said, well, I'd like to know what's the most sort of interesting thing in the book. And that's when Obama basically says, I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you. So he made a joke about it, and it does appear in this movie. And then you have this little girl, Macy, who appeared on the Ellen show, and she also brings up the president's secrets. And what happens is she was 6 years old at the time. She's this sort of a genius. She knows everything about every president, knows all the history of the presidents, can name them and stuff. So Ellen used to bring her on her show quite often. And then the one week they brought President Obama on to meet her. And it was during that event where Macy's talking to the president, and then she sort of shows off the stuff she knows about presidents. And then Ellen says, well, is there anything you want to ask the president? So basically what she says is, I want to know, is there really a book of secrets? And then Obama, and we learned later, there was a review done by somebody in Hollywood that looked at people's expressions and stuff like that. Ben Hansen did the review, and he was a former FBI guy who could take a look at body expressions and stuff. And basically he said, and once you see it, if you actually see the video, they are actually reading off cue cards. This was planned. So Macy asks Obama, is there really a book of secrets? And so Obama says, that's a secret. And then Ellen says, well, what kind of secrets would you want to know? She asks Macy. And at that point, Macy says, if aliens are real. And of course, everybody laughs. And then Obama says to Macy, so what do you think? And Macy says, well, after watching this TV show, I think that aliens are probably real. And Obama says, well, golly. And then Elaine says, well, which TV show is that? And then she says, I think it's called America's Book of Secrets. And Obama thought, I thought that was classified. And Obama then answers her question. Well, the truth is, Macy, we haven't really made direct contact with aliens yet. But when we do, I will let you know, okay? And that ends that sort of session. So again, you have this Book of Secrets things comes up. Now, what I sort of realized, and it's Priest basically spells this out, that before World War II, there was really no security briefings given directly to the president. It's kind of strange that the whole thing with national security and secrets and that sort of thing started in World War II when they started to develop the atomic bomb. And it was at that point where we went into compartmentalized information, where you only had a need to know for what you were working on. And the president puts out an executive order, President Roosevelt in 1941, which basically sets out different classifications of secrets. And he makes the classification of confidential and the classification of secret. Then later on, Truman adds the classification top secret. Eisenhower adds the classification top secret on behalf of national security material can be classified. And that's how it's built. Everybody thinks that the secrets are done by law. They're not done by law. And this is very important. And you'll see this when we talk about Donald Trump, is that the president runs the whole secrecy game. He's the guy that puts out the security clearances. He's responsible for all this. And it only starts in 1941. So they start this sort of thing where these classifications are set up. And Roosevelt knows a number of secrets, but he really doesn't pass it on. He doesn't really tell Truman about it. So when Roosevelt dies and Truman comes on, Truman doesn't know there's an atomic bomb. He has no idea that they built the atomic bomb. He doesn't realize until 12 days after or 10 days after they brief him and tell him that we have this bomb. And you get this whole sort of situation where Truman sets up and he says, presidents need to know what's going on. We need to brief upcoming presidents when they're elected. And this whole idea of keeping the president informed starts. But before Roosevelt, there really was no secrecy. There were, in terms of the president is being briefed every day and told what's going on and this sort of thing. It really sort of got started in World War II and has really developed into a real science of intelligence. So this is the executive order that started 83, 81. This is the one where the president begins this whole thing about classifying various material under, top secret, secret, confidential, these sort of things. Here's the actual executive order. And executive orders are written by the President of the United States. And there's a number of them written by each president. And it basically spells out what he wants, and this is where he sets up the whole thing with the security clearance. Now, this is the part of the interview or the lecture that I think is kind of interesting, because if you've been following the news, you know that John Brennan, who was the former CIA director under President Obama from 2013 to 2017, when Donald Trump took over, and he was involved in briefing Donald Trump when he was president-elect. His security clearance was pulled by President Trump for being involved in the Russian investigation. And this is very important because the president can do this. And this is what people have to realize. The president can pull somebody's security clearance because he's in charge of this security clearances. And what happens is that he has stated, President Trump has stated that he has a whole list of other people that he's threatening to pull their security clearances. And then there's even a rumor, there's a rumor running around that he has the right to cancel Mueller's security clearance, and that would end the Russian investigation, because in order to run that program, you need a security clearance. And effectively, and this is true, Effectively, the President of the United States could cancel every single security clearance in the United States of America because he's the one who hands out the security clearances. And this is very important because in ufology, you'll see people who will say, oh, the president doesn't know, the president's not briefed, I have a security clearance 15 levels above the president. Not true. Absolutely not true. Nobody has a security clearance above the president of the United States. The president doesn't have a security clearance. The president is the one that hands out the security clearances. So this is what happens. John Brennan loses his security clearance. It's pulled. And the president puts out this, this statement: as the head of the executive branch and commander-in-chief, I have a unique constitutional responsibility to protect classified information. So he pulls this security clearance, makes this statement, and then he threatens to do this for all these other people that he's threatening to take their security clearances. They were involved in the Russian investigation, and he's threatening to pull these security clearances. Let's skip this. Oh no, this is something that sort of ties in this. This has got to do with Kit Green. Now, Kit Green is one of the people sort of semi-related to the Stars Academy. And in one interview that he does, it was an article called "Is Uncle Sam a Closet Ufologist?" which was written a number of years ago. In that article, Kit Green, who used to run the Weird Desk at the CIA, actually is interviewed. And here's what he said. Over the years, he's received thousands of UFO-related documents in unmarked envelopes. Although some are obvious fakes, others, according to Jim, and he's using, they give him the name Jim, but it's actually Kit Green, contain information that correlates with known but still classified scientific studies. In an intriguing footnote, Jim adds, I have spoken to 3 former presidents, and the subject always comes up. This is the UFO subject, always comes up, not as a briefing, but they want to know the truth, but apparently they aren't cleared for it. Now, I say that's not true. Could not possibly be true, because the president is cleared for whatever he wants. And that comes down to this, the example of the president's daily briefing. Every morning, this briefing is presented to the president. It can be between 2 and 20 pages long, depending how much the president wants to get into this. It's very, very short articles. It's the latest intelligence that's been collected overnight around the world. And in that briefing, a lot of them have more space on the page than they have article. And the reason for that is that the president will write in there, I'm confused about this. I want to know more about this. What's this all about? And basically, he can ask for anything he wants. And it's called a deep dive. So if they talk about some sort of country and some election or whatever, he wants more information. They go back to the CIA, which produces the presidential daily briefing, and they put their analysts on it, and they go deeper and try to get the questions to whatever the president is asking. So the idea that the president will be told you don't have a right to know, you don't know, is absolutely crazy. And that's where you see John Brennan, who was the head of the intelligence, the head of the CIA. Obama can, in one stroke of a pen, basically put him out of work and cancel his security clearance. Now, here's John Brennan with President Bush at the wall where all the stars are kept for the unknown, the secret guys who gave their life at the CIA for working for the CIA. And this goes back to Brennan, and Brennan actually has a big UFO background, and this a lot of people may have heard, but they haven't really probably forgotten about it. Brennan was the CIA director from 2013 to 2017, and during that period of time, I always said Barack Obama was trying to get this thing out, but the president can't directly stand up and answer questions and this sort of thing. So it's always done basically through the back door. Now, the CIA in 1951 said they were no longer doing UFOs. They weren't interested in UFOs. And suddenly, during Brennan's tenure at the CIA, suddenly the CIA runs a straight-up UFO piece on the front page of this, the lead of the CIA. They put it on the CIA Twitter, and it's a basic straight-out piece on how to investigate UFOs. And this is on the front website of the CIA, and that's done under Brennan, which I say would have to have presidential authority. You're not going to do something that outrageous on the website of the CIA without some sort of green light from the president. So Brennan puts this whole thing, and he puts out the fact that how to investigate a UFO, and basically turns around the whole idea that the CIA really isn't interested, and they put this out. The other thing they do is 2 days before Barack Obama leaves, they actually put a whole pile of UFO and remote viewing material, and they download it on the internet 2 days before Barack Obama leaves. And here you see where this is where they put up the 12 million pages. And again, I would say that there's no way that the CIA would put out this material without some sort of green light from the president to do this kind of stuff. And a lot of UFO material was in these pages that were released just before Barack Obama leaves. What some people don't know is that that John Brennan, actually his UFO involvement goes back to the Rockefeller Initiative. For people who don't know, Rockefeller was sort of the philanthropist, son of the Rockefeller family, who was a humanitarian, had a philosophy degree from Princeton, was very interested in UFOs. And in the 1992 election, he had stated that whoever won, whether it was Bush or whether it was Perot or whether it was Clinton, he was going to get UFO disclosure. He was going to go to the president and demand UFO disclosure. He had a lot of power. So what happens is Rockefeller goes to the White House in March of 1993 and is interacting with the science advisor for the president and is demanding UFO disclosure. The White House actually greenlights an investigation on Roswell. Then they do a second investigation on Roswell. They actually do two investigations. So this is basically the background of the Rockefeller Initiative. And here's where John Brennan comes in. He was actually, surprisingly, he was actually a briefer. He was a direct briefer, one of the people who would come in, because when the president is presented with his morning briefing, they send a briefer with the report, and the briefer will sit in the chair. The president will read the report and he will ask questions, and the briefer will basically answer questions and give more material, take notes. And so every morning there's a briefer, and then the briefer will actually take the presidential briefing back with him. They very rarely is it left. Occasionally it'll be left with the president for a little while, but basically all the presidential briefings that are handed out, and some administrations would have maybe 20 people who would see it. They would take all the 20 presidential briefings back every day. And because Brennan had this high level position of briefing the president, he was sort of known as the deputy president. Now, the other interesting thing is that John Brennan was known as Obama's drone warrior. So he's big into drones. And the other person that we've followed for a number of years who's big into drones is Ron Pandolfi and his wife Aliha. Ron took Kit Green's job at the CIA, sort of at the head of the CIA weird desk or the UFO desk, this rumored job. And the story is that Brennan is friends with Ron Pandolfi because they both have this thing with drones, that Brennan was pushing using drones to save people's lives by using a drone rather than a plane. Now, no matter what anybody says, I will absolutely maintain the story of December of 1993, where Stephen Greer is brought in to meet with James Woolsey, is a true story. Stephen Greer is telling the story the way it is, because later on, Woolsey and John Peterson, who were involved, actually get caught doing the same thing with another person, which I won't get into. But anyway, so they have this meeting, and what happens at the meeting is that Woolsey claims he doesn't know what's going on. He's going to try to get some material. There's a request, why are these documents, CIA documents, being blacked out? He said he'll do some effort and do some background work into this, and he's going to try to figure out what's going on. So he actually authorizes a study, a CIA study on UFOs that was authorized after this meeting with Stephen Greer, and it comes out in 1997, and it's sort of a paper on the CIA's involvement in UFOs from 1947 to 1997. And this is the thing. It was by the Gerald Haynes, who is the historian for the CIA, wrote this thing out. Came on in 1997, and here's a quote from that report, and this is what ties in John Brennan. This is from John Brennan. This is one of the footnotes. CIA also maintained intelligence community coordination with other agencies regarding their work in parapsychology, psychic phenomena, and remote viewing experiments. In general, the agency took conservative scientific view of these unconventional scientific issues. There was no formal or official UFO project within the agency in the 1980s, and agency officials purposely kept files on UFOs to a minimum to avoid creating records that might mislead the people, mislead the public if discovered. Now, that was written by John Brennan. He was giving material into this, advising on this paper that was written, that was authorized by James Woolsey. So here's John Brennan for Richard Warshaw, executive assistant, requested information on UFOs the 30th of September 1993. So basically, Woolsey puts out the request for UFO material as an investigation, and it goes to John Brennan, who started with the CIA in 1980. He was the head of the CIA desk in Saudi Arabia. And 1993, he's providing, so he must have had some sort of expertise on UFOs to be given the job by Woolsey to go back and look inside the CIA files on what they had for UFOs. And here again is another thing that was added. There is a DIA psychic center, and the NSA studies parapsychology, that branch of psychology that deals with the investigation of such psychic phenomena as clairvoyance, extrasensory perception, and telepathy. The CIA reportedly is also a member of an incident response team to investigate UFO landings if one should occur. So this is all written, and this is all reported by John Brennan already in 1993. Now, I mentioned before that he was sort of known as the drone king, and that he had this connection with Ron Pandolfi. And we know that Ron was also involved in the Rockefeller initiative there. That this is a transcript of an interview that Scott Jones did with Ron Pandolfi, and this again is 1993, just after a briefing is given to John Gibbons, who is the president's science advisor. So Scott Jones phones up Ron Pandolfi, and he asks him, was the timing a coincidence, or was it our moving about that caused you to prepare a briefing for Gibbons? So Scott Jones was one of the two people. Him and Rockefeller went in and gave this sort of a civilian briefing to the science advisor. And it was known that when the science advisor knew Rockefeller was coming to the White House, he requested a UFO briefing because he didn't know what was going on. So he requested the briefing, and the briefing went to the CIA, and the job was given to Ron Pandolfi to do the briefing. So Scott is asking him, he phones him up after this briefing thing takes place, and he said, was it because we were going to the White House? Is that why they asked you to do the briefing for Gibbons? And he said, Ron replies, no, Gibbons tasked us to do this. So he tasked the CIA to do this. Now, what happened was Ron didn't do it. He gave the job to a guy by the name of Dr. Bruce Maccabee, who was a civilian. He said, you got to produce this briefing for the president's science advisor. He goes in and presents it, but that doesn't mean anything because it's a civilian. The reason Ron didn't do it is because the CIA is not into UFOs. You can't be doing a briefing on something that doesn't exist. if it becomes public, and it would become public because Lawrence Rockefeller was involved, then everybody would know this, the CIA had done this UFO briefing. So they give it to a civilian. So Scott Jones asked, then it was in anticipation of the visit by Lawrence and myself? Yes, it was. He said that he had gotten one-page input from Lawrence indicating that what the subject was going to be, which was UFOs, and that he didn't have any background on it, claiming that he'd never heard of MJ-12 or things like that. And so he contacted our representative, the CIA representative over there, and asked whether we could produce some support. And so here you have this conversation that takes place where Ron is involved. You have the presidential briefer is Brennan, and you have all these connections. They're all connected already back in 1993, working on this UFO thing. So when Brennan goes through, he works his way up, and usually presidential briefers end up eventually becoming CIA directors. So John becomes the presidential CIA director in 2013. Then what happens is Hillary loses the election against Trump. Trump gets in, and the day after the inauguration, Brennan appears in Florida, and he meets with my friend Billy Cox, and Billy Cox does an interview with him. And in that interview, he basically switches the whole thing. Before, the CIA was saying we were not involved. For example, in 2013, the CIA director, Gates, former CIA director, had gone down to the same event in Florida. And when Billy Cox asked him about UFOs, he said, I think I have every security clearance that there is available in the United States government. I first joined the government 46 years ago, and I have never seen one shred of evidence or one report of any kind or remains of cadavers, and basically denies. There's nothing to this. I would know. I'm the CIA director. So they're very skeptical in 2013. But when Brennan goes there the day after President Trump is sworn into office, he basically switches the whole thing. This is what he says. I think over the past several decades, there have been a number of phenomena that have been observed by pilots, both commercial pilots, both military pilots, that are basically unexplained. Maybe it's a result of some kind of atmospheric conditions or something else. And so I think the Pentagon rightly is trying to understand whether or not any of these phenomena have implications as far as national security is concerned. Some people refer to it as UFOs, an unidentified flying object. It's something that is observed, but there is no determination, and we don't know what the provenance is. So basically, he basically comes out and says, yeah, this thing's for real. He goes along with the to the stars, and basically the whole attitude of the government changes. And it's like, yes, we are investigating UFOs. We should continue to investigate UFOs. He also says, during the course of my career, this is Brennan, the former CIA director talking, during the course of my career, both in the CIA as well as at the White House, I was aware that there were endeavors to try to discern what some of these phenomena are. And so Billy Cox asked, well, what did you learn? That most of them remain unexplained, but that shouldn't mean that we don't continue to pursue it and try to apply the latest technologies and latest science to understand what may be going on. So here's Brennan basically saying, yes, I was at the CIA. I knew we were working on this kind of stuff, and we should continue to work on trying to investigate what UFOs are. We know that a number of our adversaries continue to try to look for gaps and vulnerabilities in our national defense. So anything that might take place in the air and the atmosphere is something that I think is rightly an area of pursuit on the part of our intelligence community and Defense Department. That basic statement that he made there is exactly what Lou Elizondo is saying. Is exactly what To the Stars. It's almost like they're reading from the same playbook. And you got to remember, so you have the CIA is denying all this stuff. As soon as Trump is elected, Brennan comes up and he basically gives this whole spiel. Yes, we knew UFOs existed. We're working on it, and we should continue to work on it because the Russians and the Chinese might do it, and this whole threat thing. So again, here you have Brennan is had his security clearance pulled, and this only happened a couple of days ago. I didn't want to play the video. I don't have the rights to the video, but if you go, he does an interview with MSNBC, and there's actually 2 UFOs that appear on the screen, and it occurs at about the 5-minute mark, and it goes on to about 6 minutes, almost 6.5 minutes. For a minute and a half, this object is flashing. There's one down by his shoulder here, you can see, and then there's a second one that appears. This one disappears, and a second one appears up near his ear, and this thing is flashing. Now, it may be some, something on the screen or whatever, but it was just very peculiar that this thing would appear on the screen. Now, back to the daily briefing, and this is the important thing, because what I was trying to do early on is I figured that if you want to find out what happened at Roswell, what you would do is look at the presidential daily briefing the day after the Roswell crash to see what did they tell the president, because the overnight they would be working on the latest top secret material, what the president needs to know, and they would do it. Now, before 1963, it wasn't called the presidential daily briefing. They had other names for this, and it wasn't as sophisticated as it was in 1963 or 62, I guess, when Kennedy started. And Kennedy wanted this sort of detailed out. And Kennedy was the kind of guy, I didn't realize this, people said he didn't, he had problems with the CIA, they didn't like him, that's why they killed him. And when you read this book, it tells you a completely different story. It was actually the State Department that he didn't trust, because he couldn't get an answer from the State Department. He basically realized how many people worked at the State Department, and he went every time for an answer to the CIA, because he said it would take 4 to 5 days just to get a yes or no from the State Department. So they started to present this thing, and it was called I think it was called the President's Intelligence Checklist. And because Kennedy couldn't sit still, he was almost like you hear these stories about Donald Trump. He couldn't sit still. He was always moving around, and it was very hard to brief him. They would say that when they would try to give him the daily briefing, by the time they tracked him down, running around doing different things, he had lost interest in the subject that they were bringing up. So they made this thing where he could actually stick it in his pocket. He would have his briefing of the most top secret stuff that had happened overnight, and he would have it in his pocket. As he's moving around, he could read this briefing. This is when the presidential daily briefing really takes off. And what it is, again, it's to sit down with the president the first thing every morning and give him mostly foreign stuff, and detail the president on the most important things he needs to know as the day starts. Now, Harry Truman started this thing, and his weren't all as sophisticated. And what you found, some people ask me why would the government disclose UFOs? Well, the government eventually discloses everything. As you know, the Roadrunners, the Area 51 people who built the U-2, the SR-71, their whole story was told. And we now know that some of these daily briefing documents are being released by the CIA. And in fact, I think about 5 days ago, they just released another 20 morning briefings that were given to President Truman. I read a couple of them. They're pretty boring, talking about China and different countries around the world. Nothing very significant, but this is top secret briefing. So Truman is where it starts. Before Truman, there really is not that much intelligence. This is one of the ones they called the Daily Summary, and this is from what's the date on here? 1951. So this is the daily summary that would be presented to the president. And the ones I saw that I was reading from 46 were 2 or 3 pages long, just not very long, but just a couple of paragraphs on each subject. And Eisenhower came in, and again, the idea was, I remember when I was doing the presidential stuff, there was a story that Eisenhower had the same sort of reputation as Donald Trump, that he didn't like to read. There was even a sort of a joke that went around that you shouldn't give Eisenhower a briefing document that was too long because his lips would get tired reading it. And so there was this idea, but Eisenhower really didn't use this presidential briefing thing that has been started by Truman. What he did is all the material would be presented at for the National Security Council meeting that he would host once a week. I think it was on Thursday. He would host this meeting every Thursday, and all the top intelligence would be brought up there, and it would be actually read out in the national security meeting that would be chaired by Eisenhower every week. Kennedy's the one where it really got going, where they had this to bring the president up to date with the latest things. And because he was a former newspaper reporter, they wrote it up like almost like a newspaper. And that's where it basically gets started. The interesting thing that came with this, and this comes into this whole thing about how much power does the president have, and who gets to see it. One of the things that was brought up in this presidential daily briefing story that was written in this book was the fact that Kennedy didn't get along with Vice President Johnson. So Johnson never saw the presidential daily briefing. It was given to other people in the administration, the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, but the Vice President was never allowed to see the briefing. He was cut out. So when Kennedy was assassinated, the very next morning, the briefer had to go in. That was the first time that Johnson realized there was such a thing as this morning top secret briefing. Now, this is significant. These are the three people, and it comes down to the CIA usually does foreign intelligence, but for some reason, whether it's because it involves technology and trying to compete with the Russians on getting technology from UFOs, the CIA has always seemed to be at the forefront of the UFO story. And these are these sort of the weird desk people. The one now is Ron Pandolfi on the right. Kit Green, I've already mentioned, the one in the middle. And Ron ran it, I think, from 83 or 85 till present. Kit Green from about 1970 to 1983 or 85. And the person before Kit Green was Arthur Lundahl. And Arthur Lundahl was the sort of the main UFO guy and the guy who briefed the presidents. He actually stated to one UFO researcher that he had briefed a number of presidents on UFOs. So he was the main guy. If the White House wants to know about UFOs, they would call him in. And this is some of the material that I collected. I actually have a collection of Art Lundahl letters, and I remember Hal Puthoff found out I had them, and he asked whether he could get my collection, and I sent him. And here you see some letters that this very top CIA guy, who actually was the guy who briefed Kennedy on the Cuban Missile Crisis because he was a photographic expert. You'll see he talks in these letters that many thanks for your latest release on the UFO problem. Excellent. He stated it was the most important subject and the thing he wanted to talk about. So he was actually interacting with UFO researchers back in the Kennedy days. And what you'll see with To the Stars, you'll see a lot of former CIA people: Kit Green, Sammy Van Mellon, Puthoff, Rapp, and Kahn, and all these sort of things. And it's peculiar why the CIA would be involved in UFOs, because the CIA is supposed to be foreign intelligence, and yet they seem to have this role in charge of UFOs. One of the interesting things that came out of this whole thing with people that briefed the president on these various subjects, and would be Arthur Lundahl briefing the president, is I knew the whole Arthur Lundahl connection, but most people in UFOs didn't know who Art Lundahl was. And some of the documents that were leaked in the 1990s, one of them was a citation, and those documents were being released by a guy by the name of Tim Cooper. And Ryan Wood he and his father were working on these documents. And at one point, I was with Ryan Wood. He showed me a citation that was given to Tim Cooper's father in the 1960s for working on a UFO program at the National Photographic Interpretation Center. And the document is an altered document, a phony document, because they actually spell LeMay's name wrong. But Ryan didn't even realize what this document was. When I saw this document, I realized the key connection to the UFO phenomena and why they would put this document out. And I said, can I get a copy of the document? And the importance is that all these documents that leaked, the UFO documents, which were called the new MJ-12 documents, were leaked by Tim Cooper, who was getting them from CIA people. And the claim was that it was because of his father that they made connection with him. His father had worked for the National Photographic Interpretation Center. that was run by Arthur Lundahl, and that was a connection. And only I would know that there was this very direct connection between Tim Cooper's father and the guy rumored to be running the UFO program. And what I learned as I was doing research just in the last month on this is there are still FOIAs in at the Eisenhower Library on this whole connection, and I'm trying to track that material down. Everybody thinks that story was, phony documents gone, whatever. There's still FOIAs being filed on this thing, and there's still people doing research trying to verify why these documents were leaked. Again, when it comes to the president knowing things, here's Ellington, Buford Ellington, who was the head of the FEMA. And he had the first meeting with President Johnson after the Kecksburg crash. It was the very first meeting. And the rumor is that FEMA is very closely connected to the UFO thing. I was chasing a story, which is on my presidential UFO website, where I talk about the connection between Mount Weather, which is the place, the FEMA facility where if there's a nuclear attack, they take the president, and that connection to that facility and UFOs. And Ellington was in charge of FEMA at that time, and the first meeting right after he meets with Johnson after the crash at Kecksburg. Johnson was very interested in UFOs. He actually was the head of the Space Council, which is another thing that people don't really realize. People think it's the president that's in charge of space, and in many administrations it's not. Johnson was given the head of the Space Council to run the National Space Council. Kennedy really didn't have anything to do with it. It was Johnson who was running it, and it's the same thing in the Trump administration. The head of the Space Council is run by Pence, and that's why you see in the last couple of weeks, when this space announcement was made about the Space Force, it was Pence that made the announcement, not Donald Trump, because Pence is the guy that's running the Space Council. And I mentioned this briefly before, you can actually go now to the CIA website, and they have released a bunch of these presidential daily briefings from the Truman administration, from the Eisenhower administration, from the Kennedy administration, and from the Johnson administration. There's, I think, 2,500 in the Johnson and Kennedy administration, these daily briefings, so you can see what the president was being told first thing every morning. And here's the Mount Weather thing. This is this connection to the FEMA facility. I go now, and I'm going to skip some of this stuff because I've done a lot of lectures on various presidents. I want to skip through just to show you how these presidents dealt with intelligence. Richard Nixon, who is very interested in UFOs, was rumored to have shown the bodies to Jackie Gleason at an Air Force base in Florida. He never saw the presidential daily briefing. He really didn't have any interest in it. The presidential daily briefing went to Henry Kissinger, and Henry Kissinger would take it and other intelligence from the State Department and stuff, and he would do the briefing of Nixon. Nixon apparently never read it, and he didn't make any notes, because most presidents, when they get the briefing, they make notes in the borders and in the margins, and they ask questions and stuff. And basically, it was Henry Kissinger who controlled the presidential daily briefing. Nixon is known as the one guy who really never read it. Nixon is also involved with Bob Emenegger. I believe this is the documentary of 1975 called UFOs Past, Present, Future, which I absolutely maintain was greenlighted by Richard Nixon to disclose various pieces of the UFO story to the American public. And that's my friend Bob Emenegger, who had worked on Nixon's re-election campaign and knew Bob Haldeman and knew a couple of people in the administration, and had actually stated that during the entire time they did UFOs Past, Present, and Future, when they were shooting, there was always a CIA agent on the set. And we go to Gerald Ford, who again he was a guy who was very conscious of the presidential daily briefing. For the first year, he took very careful look at the briefing. He was given the briefing every morning. He would ask all these questions of the briefer who came with the report and stuff, and it sort of leaked out. There's an interesting story that relates to that as well. And the question comes down to, is the president told about the UFO thing? I mentioned Bob Emenegger just a minute ago. One of the stories that Bob Emenegger had was that he had been given the Holloman Air Force Base film. And this was a rumored film that was shot at Holloman Air Force Base where a UFO lands. It's shot from 4 different camera angles. The craft lands, the door opens up, these aliens come out, they're greeted by American officials, and this whole thing is caught on film. And the rumored story was that it was actually, it's shown as part of the presidential daily, or the presidential intelligence briefing when the president comes in. And I know, at least for this administration, that took place because there's one of the people who is associated with To the Stars, I'm not going to say who it is, To the Stars Academy, who told me clearly that he talked to Gerald Ford, and he asked Ford, "Did you see the briefing? Did you see this Holloman Air Force Base landing?" And Ford said, "Yes, I saw it." And the question was asked, "Well, when was the briefing?" And he said, "I'm never going to tell you when the briefing is. Don't even go there." There was, as far as I know, no discussion as to what Ford thought it was, but he confirmed that yes, when he was briefed, he was shown this supposed 15-minute color film of a landing at Holloman Air Force Base. Jimmy Carter is the biggest surprise, and I sort of knew this was coming because there's a lot of rumors in the UFO community about different presidents and what they are. And if you read this Book of Secrets, you'll see a completely different story, and it agrees with a story that has come out with former books that have been written by Secret Service. And what the biggest one that you get is Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter was very much different than the way most people think he was. People think he was this sort of gentle guy who taught Sunday school from the time he was 17 years old and stuff. He was actually a very strong A-type personality. He was very determined. He would fire people. I remember talking to the woman who, a high-level woman who was head of public relations for the Carter Library many years ago. She told me that they were really scared because a lot of people were drinking and smoking, and they were afraid they were going to get caught and fired. So it was that kind of thing. The Secret Service would talk about the fact that Jimmy Carter wanted to be the people's guy, and he would carry his luggage in front of cameras, and as soon as he's off camera, he would drop the luggage. And he was a very sort of strong personality. The story is told, and I should clear this up because this comes down to the briefing. What is the president told? There's a story that's told that when President-elect Carter was being briefed by Bush Senior, who was the CIA director. Because what would happen in the old days, the CIA director would brief the president-elect for the next administration. So the briefing was taking place, and it was apparently there where Jimmy Carter asks for the UFO files. And the rumored story was that Bush said, "Curiosity is not sufficient need to know," and basically turned him down. And that's not really the story. The real story was that, as the presidential daily briefing shows, the president doesn't have a security clearance. He doesn't need to ask questions. He can get whatever he wants, and everybody will do. He's called the first customer. All the intelligence agencies will give him exactly what he wants. So when he asked for the UFO files, he was not asking for the Roswell, the top secret files. He was already going to get that. What he was asking for is when he was running for president, he had promised that if elected, he would release all the UFO files. So what he was asking for was the UFO files for the public. He wanted the files, and that's when Bush Senior said, "Curiosity is not sufficient need to know." So the idea is, we don't care what the public, if they're curious about UFOs, that's not important. And he said, and this proves that it was not the top secret files, because what he said to Carter was, if you want those files, you should go to the House Science and Technology Committee. The top secret files are not going to be in the House Science and Technology Committee. Those were the files that were for the people. So Carter had this ability, like every other president, to ask for whatever he wanted. He was given the top material, had no security clearance. And what the book points out confirms what all these other people said. That he was a very A-type personality, that he was very tight on security. He was very tight on who got to see the presidential briefing. His Secretary of State was not allowed to see it. which most Secretary of States in administrations were allowed to see it. His Secretary of Defense was not allowed to see it. And his good friend, Stansfield Turner, he basically did not bring on Bush. Bush was basically fired. He brought on Stansfield Turner, who was a Navy buddy of his, that was a friend of his, because he trusted him to run the CIA. But Stansfield Turner, the report was that Stansfield Turner was never allowed to be in the presidential daily briefing. And again, here what happened was that Brzezinski, who was the national security advisor, actually took control of the presidential briefing. And the CIA director was told to sort of stay out of this. And he said, well, I'm the one that produces it. It's an intelligence briefing. So Brzezinski looked on the chart and saw, yeah, it was called an intelligence briefing. Later on in the morning, they were giving a national security briefing. So he basically said, okay, now it's called the national security briefing. I'm the national security advisor. And now you step back and mind your own business. So Jimmy Carter's own CIA director was not really involved. He was producing the briefing, but he was really not in the loop. It was Brzezinski that was running everything. So when you read this book, you see the other side to some of the rumored stories you've heard as to what may actually have happened in there. This was something I had heard from the Secret Service people, and it agreed with the fact that Jimmy Carter was as hard-nosed a guy on intelligence and on running the White House as anybody else. He was not this meek, mild guy that everybody was running over and people were telling him, you can't see this, you can't see that. He was a very strong president. He was not a weak president, as a lot of people try to point out. This is what's even some of the jokes that they would put out at his time, talking about the fact that he wanted a clean CIA, and you have these little Boy Scout people that were being hired for the CIA. Here's the famous letter, some of the FOIAs that filed, just as a matter of interest. Jimmy Carter, because he said he was going to release the UFO files, was absolutely inundated with mail. This is a photo called 7,000 letters, 7,000 UFO letters that were piling into the White House, and they were spread out. It's hard you can locate some of them, but they're hard to locate because they were put under people's names. So they're spread out through all different files. They're not in a particularly single file. Carter was, of course, known as the guy who produced the leak. The president has access to everything, and Carter had access to everything, and he's the guy that leaked the fact that the stealth fighter existed when he was running for re-election. And there was a lot of people very upset with the fact that he leaked the fact that we had the stealth fighter. But Jimmy Carter was on top of the latest classified material and the latest weapon systems that they had, which completely goes contrary to what most people think. They think he was totally out of the loop. Not true at all. We go to Ronald Reagan, and again, the book shows something completely different. The rumored story that I had, and I've been to the Reagan Library a number of times, was that Ronald Reagan really wasn't that interested in foreign intelligence. And there was even a story that when he was being briefed, he had the comics in the briefing. He was actually reading the comics instead of following the briefing stuff. And this book points out exactly the opposite, that Ronald Reagan would make these notes. He would ask this, he would change, he would correct typos, circle typo mistakes in the presidential daily briefing. And it showed a completely different Ronald Reagan than the one we think, where he's totally out of the loop. He's not knows what's going on. But one thing that he did is that he wanted a lot of stuff in his briefing as to personalities. He was very interested in knowing who he was dealing with, like the Soviet leader. He wanted to know, and they would produce videos for him of these various people that he was going to meet. He was very interested in people's personalities when he was dealing with them. This is the national security advisor who would be in on all the presidential daily briefings, would get it every day. And this is Colin Powell, who famously told a presidential historian that part of his job was to stop Ronald Reagan from talking about the little green men. Ronald Reagan would start talking in meetings and stuff, and it was part of Colin Powell's job to try to stop Reagan and divert him and get him back on subject instead of allowing him to talk about UFOs and alien stuff in meetings. And this goes to this story, and I want to bring this up because this is kind of something new that's come up. This is the famous picture taken in the green room with Steven Spielberg, just moments before they go into the White House theater, where they screened E.T. the Extraterrestrial. And I worked very hard on this when I was there. I was actually the one that got the FOIA to have this picture released. And as you recall, during that screening, there was two stories. One was that Ronald Reagan, and this was told to Steven Spielberg by Jamie Chandray on a movie set in Hawaii, that Chandray said that Spielberg had told him that the president, just before the movie ended, he leaned over and he said, "I bet you there aren't 6 people in this whole room who know how true this whole thing is." Steven Spielberg later goes on audio and he actually tells the story after the movie, and the fact that Reagan stands up, he looks around the room as if he's doing a head count, and he said, "Stephen, I'd like to thank you for bringing E.T. the extraterrestrial to the White House. We really enjoyed it. And I just want to let you know there's probably half a dozen people in this room who know that everything on that screen is absolutely true." And Spielberg said he said it without smiling. What I want to add tonight, I've got 2 people who, and I trust these people, who have told me this. That story may actually be true. The story that E.T. the extraterrestrial is a true story. I was told by a source that I trust that the story is true. It was based on fact, and that Elliot, the little boy, is still alive. And I know who he works for, and it is being told by a very high-level official who's still alive. And whether this will come out when he dies, but the person who told me the story is completely trustworthy to me. The second thing was I was told by another source who I know very well, who had actually interviewed Steven Spielberg's mother, and I was told that the scene in the bedroom where E.T.'s hiding in the closet with the stuffed animals is a real story. And the implication was that that happened to Steven Spielberg, that whole story with E.T. in the closet was an actual true story. So these are things that have just popped up. And it comes down to this idea, are they using movies to acclimatize people, using actual true stories and making them look like they're fiction to get the story out? So Reagan was very interested in the presidential daily briefing, very interested in foreign intelligence and stuff, completely contrary to the stories that are sort of out there. Bush was the highlight guy. He took the briefing more seriously than anybody else because he was the CIA director before he became president, and he would study it. He would make notes. He respected the guys who were giving him the briefing, and actually told his son, when his son became president, he said the number one thing you got to do is you got to read the briefing every morning, and you got to bring the briefer in and ask him questions. So he was, and he was also a second guy who claimed was phoned by this associate, somebody connected to the stars, who actually phoned and said that yes, he saw the Holloman Air Force Base during a briefing as well, but it wasn't when he was president-elect. It was when he was CIA director. Bill Clinton was very interested in the presidential daily briefing. He would get all this material. And this goes to the idea that the stories put out that Clinton was out of the loop. There was some sort of person, some sort of Wizard of Oz behind the scene that was basically running the whole thing, and the president, and that he was just like a puppet. He didn't have any authority. And there's 2 things that go against this. And the one is this whole idea with Brennan, that Donald Trump basically fires Brennan. Clinton had the same opportunities as everybody else. He's called the first customer. The presidential daily briefing is given to him every morning, and he did write in ask questions of the briefer, ask them to look at different things. He could simply have written in the margin, "I want to know about UFOs. I want to know about Roswell." That's called a deep dive. They have no choice. The CIA has to go back and provide the best answer they can to that thing. Figure it out. It's not up to the president to find out where this stuff's coming from or who to ask or whatever. He just puts it in his presidential daily briefing. He says, "I want to know about this. I want to know about that." And that is actually verified by President Clinton's public statements. During the one briefing, or during the one interview that he does, I think it was the one where I helped get this out of Hong Kong, he actually says, "I'm kind of embarrassed that, I actually looked for Roswell, then I couldn't find anything." And people will quote that and say, "Look, he couldn't find anything. He was out of the loop. They were refusing to tell him stuff." And basically they leave out the other half of the statement where he said, I requested all the files on Roswell, which is what he could do on a presidential daily briefing. He could just simply write in the margin, give me all the Roswell files, and they have to bring them because he's the commander, he's the head guy. Everybody has a security clearance based upon him. He's the top of the pile. They would have to give him. And he said, I asked for the Roswell files and I looked through them, and no, I don't think a UFO crashed in Roswell, New Mexico. So he actually confirmed that, yes, he had actually asked for the Roswell material and he had seen it. And of course, he's involved with the big story with Woolsey. Woolsey had a UFO sighting, a daylight UFO sighting with his wife in the 1970s, was very interested in UFOs. And Woolsey was another guy that was cut out of the loop. People think that all these people can sort of walk in the president's office, and it basically is up to the president's discretion who gets to see the presidential briefing. And Woolsey, there's a story told that Woolsey only saw the president twice, that he would come sometimes with the briefing, and he would have to hand it over, and he never was in the office when the presidential daily briefing was given. And there was actually a joke that there was a guy who crashed a plane into the White House lawn, a small plane. And the joke was, well, that was Woolsey trying to get a meeting with the president. And Woolsey was upset at first, and then later on actually agreed. Yeah, this was actually true. He started telling the joke as well. Yeah, that was me trying to get a meeting with the president. So even though he was CIA director, his briefers would go in every morning, but he himself really didn't have any interaction with the president at all. And then he claimed he didn't have any contact with UFOs. But we know for a fact he did two studies. One was a classified study on UFOs. One was an unclassified study. And that was the unclassified thing was actually released in the CIA, actually made it public. Bush Jr., again, and even I thought he was sort of like a guy who wasn't really all that smart and really wasn't that interested in what was going on. Apparently from this book, he was the most aggressive person for asking questions. It was like going in, you would be sure you knew the answers to what was on that presidential daily briefing. There was even a joke that he knew more Muslim names from some country than the CIA people. He was really on top of this whole thing, and he would grill when he got his presidential daily briefing, he would grill the people as to what about this, what about that, all these questions, go back and find out about this, go back and find out about that. So it's completely different than the idea I had about George Bush before he went in. And of course, this is the whole thing that he played off on the UFO interest when he was running for president. But the story was always that Cheney was the guy who was running the White House, even when I asked the question. And here's me actually asking the question. So I've always believed the fact that it's basically just classified material, that these people have a need to know. And the reason they don't talk about it because it's classified. Here's me in 2001, just after Bush gets into the White House, and Dick Cheney goes on a radio talk show in Washington, D.C. And here's me asking him about, did someone give you a briefing? And that means, did someone walk in with a top secret document, swear you to secrecy, and tell you what's going on? Because the briefing will contain the true information. So here's me asking Cheney about UFOs and the briefing. And it's not going to play.
Good morning. Cheney, I have a question. Since the statement made by George Bush last July, there's been a vicious rumor circulating on the UFO that you've been read into the UFO program. My question to you is, in any of your government jobs, have you ever been briefed on the subject of UFOs? And if you have, when was it and what were you told?
Well, if I had been briefed on that, I'm sure it was probably classified and I couldn't talk about it.
Is there investigation going on within this administration, Mr. Vice President, as to UFOs?
I have not come across the subject since I've been back in government, I guess since January 20th.
All right.
So you have, this is a story, and there was actually a story told that someone had been in a cocktail party or a party and asked Bush, what about UFOs? And he said, talk to Cheney. So the rumored story always was, and I believed it, was that Cheney was the UFO guy and Bush really didn't know what was going on, or he wasn't interested or whatever. But then you get him, he goes on the Kimmel show, and this happened I think last year. He goes on the Kimmel show, and Kimmel, of course, always asks people about the briefing, about did you go for the documents? Did you find out what's going on with UFOs? And if you see what Bush says, you get a clear indication again, the president is cleared on everything. He can see whatever he wants. He can ask whatever he wants. He's told whatever he wants, and that he did get material on UFOs. So here's what the conversation between him and Kimmel. So Kimmel says, when you were in office, I don't know when this happened or if it did happen, did you go through the secret files, the UFO documents? And Bush says, because maybe. And Jimmy Kimmel says, if I was president, that would be the first thing I did. And Bush said, my daughters asked me the same question. And Kimmel said, they did? Bush said, yeah. So Kimmel says, well, would you be allowed to tell your daughters what's in those files? And Bush said, no. Now that you're out of office, you can say anything you want, right? And Bush says, true, but I'm not telling you. And Jimmy says, are you not telling me? Bush says, I'm not telling you nothing. And Jimmy says, are there really great secrets that you know that you can't share with the people? And Bush said, yeah, there are, and you'll never write about them? And Bush said, no. So this is the thing. He knew exactly what was going on. He had the material, and it's classified, and he's not talking about it. And there's actually one, and I guess I didn't put it in the presentation. There's actually a video. If you go on the internet, there's actually an interview. There's actually an interview that's done with Dan Quayle, who is the vice president, who talks about the fact that yes, we worked on UFOs. And we really didn't get very far on it. But yes, we spent a lot of time, I think was the expression he had, looking at the subject of UFOs, him and Bush. So the vice president knew as well. Barack Obama goes on the Kimmel show, and he's asked the same question. Did you look for the files? Did you try to get it? And that's when Obama says, I can't reveal anything. And again, Ben Hansen does the review of his expressions. And he's told before the interview starts, he's told, well, you know that they're going to be watching everything you say. They're going to be watching how you breathe and stuff like that. And that was because Bill Clinton had appeared on there, and he had been asked a question about UFOs. Did you get told? And Ben Hansen did the review and determined that Bill Clinton was being deceptive in his answers. So when he brings this up with Obama, Obama says, yes, I know. Yeah, I know they're going to be watching how I react, you know, whether I swallow and stuff like that. And when he's asked the question, what did you do? Did you see the files? And when he says, I can't reveal anything, they have a high-def TV. They got a camera, and they're watching his lapel pin, his little USA lapel pin move up and down. He's breathing 42 times a minute. He's hyperventilating when he gets asked that question. He's very petrified when that question comes up. And he basically says, I can't reveal anything. Basically saying, yes, I saw it, but I can't talk about it. Now it comes to President Trump, and there's a bunch of stories. I was told clearly that from mostly Dan Smith, that briefing had been done of Donald Trump by James Woolsey, who was, we've mentioned before, in the Clinton administration, Mike Pillsbury, and Ron Pandolfi. Now, whether you can believe that, apparently this happened in December. A number of times they met. Ron actually notified a guy by the name of Robert Collins, who was one of the members of the Avery. He was a former physicist for the U.S. Air Force. And in that posting that Collins makes, he said, I got a message from my friend Ron Pandolfi, and he said, Donald Trump is pro-disclosure and against disinformation, and we'll wait, something like we'll wait till things get going before we make a move or something, as if they were going to do something on the disclosure front. I've just been told now, I don't know what the source is, so I can't really verify whether it's for real. Donald Trump is very interested in this whole thing. He's watching this. And I think this gradual disclosure thing that's going on has been going on through various administrations. It's something that happens on behalf of the president of the United States, not any particular president. So Trump is involved, and Trump is the one who basically confirmed that he's in charge. Anybody who thinks that somebody behind the scenes is telling Donald Trump what to do, that there's somebody and he's not in charge, he's not doing what he wants. This is absolute insanity. He's basically proved the case that the president is the most powerful man. He can do what he wants. He has absolute power to get rid of everybody's security clearance. Everybody reports to him, and he has access to any material that they have, any material he wants on UFOs, he can get it. Yeah. And I think we'll end at that. And if there's any questions, we'll take a couple of questions. And my assistant Desta here is going to read some questions that were coming in.
Okay, there was a couple ones. The first one was from Julian Latour, and it was, do you think nuclear activity can damage our life soul cycle?
Well, I'll say I'm not sure about the life soul cycle, but I can absolutely assure you that the intelligence behind the phenomena is absolutely concerned about nuclear weapons. My initial sighting occurred in May of 1975. The sightings happened here. I live in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. The sightings occurred in Carman, Manitoba, Canada, and they started in February of 1975. The sightings almost nightly in this town. That was exactly the same time that they put in the only anti-ballistic missile unit that ever went operational in the United States. This was pre-Star Wars. And before they were thinking of putting in Reagan, putting it in outer space, they had it on the ground in North Dakota. They had, North Dakota had 300 Minuteman nuclear missiles that would take out the whole world. And in 1975, they put in 100 new nuclear missiles in order to shut down incoming Russian missiles, because the number one target of the Russians' missiles was not Washington, not Los Angeles. It's the missiles. Unless you take out the missiles, you're not going anywhere. And so the sightings started exactly when they put that unit in, those 100 new nuclear missiles to shoot down the Russian missiles. And the sightings stopped in November of 1950, or they faded out in November 1950. That's when they shut this down. There was a negotiation with the Russians, and they started to take the missiles out. So it was exactly that point. The other thing that, if you look at some of the research done by a guy named Perkins with cattle mutilations, he maintains that most cattle mutilation stuff happens downwind and downstream from nuclear power accidents and testings and stuff like that. So absolutely, the nuclear weapons is something that is very disturbing as to exactly how it does. And a lot of starting almost back in the 1950s, most of the contactees and a lot of the experiencers are also told the same thing, that we have to stop the nuclear missiles, that they affect not only our planet, but they affect the rest of the galaxy, that everything is one, everything is connected, and that what we do here affects everybody else. And the last thing I'll point about nuclear weapons is, when I first got involved in the 70s, I started researching the work that was being done by Wilbert Brockhouse-Smith, who ran the flying saucer program for the Canadian government from 1950 to 1954 called Project Magnet. And he was very adamant about the fact that he was being told, because he was a contactee, that the missiles had to be stopped, nuclear weapons had to be stopped. And he actually maintained that nuclear weapons were causing damage that was bringing planes down. And what he described was the fact that when you see a nuclear test, you see the sort of the cloud that goes up in the air and all the energy that goes in that direction. What he says is that the damage goes in all directions. So you also have this wave that goes through the earth from a nuclear weapon thing, and it'll come out on the other side of the earth. And he called it areas of reduced binding. And he maintained that the tests that were done in the 1950s were creating these areas of reduced binding around the world, and that planes were being brought down because it would affect the plane, how it was being held together when they went through these areas of reduced binding. And they actually made an instrument to detect these areas. And his son was very interested in this, and he tried to get this into the Canadian government. The Canadian government wouldn't have anything to do with it. But so you have right back in 1950, 51, 52, the guy that ran the Canadian government UFO program was saying nuclear weapons is the key. Or even if when you take a look at the first contactees, George Adamski and all these people, that first contact took place, I think it was 9 days or 10 days after the detonation of the hydrogen bomb. That's when all these contactees started coming forward saying, stop the nuclear weapons. I'm talking to aliens and stuff. Before that, there was really nobody talking to aliens. Okay, that's that question.
Christine Siebel.
Thank you, Christine Siebel, for super chat.
Yay.
Beautiful.
Next question is Joshua Phillips asks, to the Stars Academy has some new material from Rendlesham Forest. In the spirit of that case, he heard that there was reported mist there. Do you think it's the same mist that was in the Zendras?
We're going to interview, who are we going to interview from England? We're interviewing
Gary Hesseltine.
Gary Hesseltine, man, my good friend. I forgot his name. Gary Hesseltine. We're going to do. Gary has a documentary coming out where he's going to talk about this thing. There was and I asked him how many people described this mist. I think he said 6 different people described this mist, and the whole thing with the mist is theirs is described as yellow, the Rendlesham Forest mist. Now, if that case did take place, there's a lot of people that maintain that that incident occurred. That didn't occur. The story is told that this bunch of officers were standing in a circle, and that this mist was there, and that this sort of giant UFO appeared in the middle of this mist. I'm very interested in the case because it does fit with the Zendra thing. For people who know, I did the Zendras that were at Mount Shasta, and we have a book, but when it'll get out, I've got two long chapters on these 2 Zendras that appeared 2014, 2015, and that's the way it was described. It was especially in 2014, there was no moon, so it was completely pitch black on the side of this mountain, 4,000 feet up Mount Shasta, and what they had been told was that there was they have what are called antennas, the same thing that To the Stars uses. They're using the term the antennas, but the Mission Rama people, or the Project Rama, whatever you want to call them, they call these people antennas, and these are people that are able to tell you when the sighting is going to take place, even down to the minute where it's going to take place. And there was 6 antennas who had said that there was going to be a Zendra opened. I think it was in 2014. So these 2 UFOs fly over during what's called a program sighting, and because these 6 antennas said there was going to be a Zendra, 2 of the people go into the forest looking for the Zendra, which is this sort of light. And the way it was described by the witnesses I talked to, and I talked to quite a few witnesses, there were in the 2014 one, there were 9 witnesses that were inside the 7 witnesses inside the Zendra and 2 right outside the Zendra, and they all basically describe a bluish white mist that was coming off the ground, but it was lit up. So in this pitch darkness, it was lighting up the sort of the ground in the forest as this mist came out. And the way Paula Harris described it, she was taken from this meditation circle. There's about 150 people or whatever in the circle. She was told this being called Antarel wants to see you. Are you ready? Come to the forest. And they take her. They've already found this Zendra. They take her, and she describes there's about 5 women who hold hands, and they are told you're to go to the mist and you're to walk through this mist, which is also described in 2015. They described the same mist. The mist is coming off the ground. And what Paula told me is they were told to hold hands until you get through the mist. As soon as you get through the mist, you're to let go of each other's hands, and not until. And she said it was the scariest moment of her life when she had to let go of these women's hands once they got through this mist. And what she described at that point, and the other women described, is they all had separate experiences, almost like they were in the Zendra with this being by themselves. Some were getting messages. Paula was hearing this guy talk in some foreign language. They all experienced something completely different. But what they're describing is exactly the same thing. And there's actually photographs of, if you Google 2009 Uruguay Zendra World Conference, there's a couple of videos on there of a Zendra, of this sort of it sometimes appears like a rainbow of this fog. But usually that's the way it's described. And that's the important part. And even some of the people that are associated, like Ron Pandolfi, even I've heard some of the To the Stars people are sort of indicating this is the way you got to look, is this whole portal, Zendra, Stargate thing. This is where it's at. And I think it's one of the more important stories in ufology, because if Zendras occur, and what you get in a Zendra, and the one particular example was a guy by the name of Sixto Paz, who's the guy that really started this whole thing, walks into a Zendra, and he walks onto another planet. If that is actually true, that you can actually walk through this sort of a mist thing, step into it, and be on another planet, then we've got a lot to learn about how the universe works. And it's going to be not as nuts and bolts as people think it is. The Zendra thing really defies the whole idea that it's nuts and bolts, and these crafts are coming thousands of years across the universe. It appears from what everybody's saying now is they're popping in and out of where they're coming from, and it doesn't take them very long to get here at all.
Next question is from 70s Dave 34, and he wants to know if there's any more information on the incident at Malmstrom Air Force Base in January. There was a power outage at the base for 10 minutes during a sighting. Oh,
this is January this year. Interesting. Well, maybe if you can get my email, White House UFO, send it to me. I wasn't aware of that. They absolutely are interfering, playing with, especially the nuclear weapon thing. And I think it's pretty important. Like, I know when you see the To the Stars, the way it's written up there is, and some of the people that are associated with this thing, that they're interfering with our military preparedness, our military operations and stuff. And a lot of people see the interaction with the nuclear missiles as a threat. And I say, if they can shut down the nuclear missiles, they should be given the Nobel Peace Prize. Forget about being a threat. I mean, this is absolutely, they're just sending a signal, which is, I think we post that thing with the, where I did the thing with the theory of wow.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. It's called the theory of wow, where I say that a lot of what they're doing is actually just messaging. So when they come and they shut down all the nuclear missiles, they're sending a message. It's the same as with the Nimitz. People think that UFOs are random events. They're not random events. When you see a UFO, you're meant to see the UFO. And the Nimitz is a prime example. When the Nimitz thing occurred, this thing was there for at least a week and was playing with them, and it wanted to be seen, and they wanted them to chase them. It's a messaging thing. They're sending these signals. And that's why you have 39% of people that are on board the ship. The experiencers will talk about being shown the screen with the environmental damage and all this kind of stuff. They're messaging us. They're trying to indirectly give us these kind of signals. And that's where this thing comes, this possible connection to cattle mutilations. That a lot of them, apparently there was one right outside of NORAD's gate where they dropped a cow. And the whole thing is, why are you dropping the cow when you could take the cow? It's a messaging thing. And so you may not know why the cow was there or why they did this, but somebody knows the possible nuclear connection, that this is a contaminated area. There's something has happened there that they've managed to keep secret. So these are very important things when they're doing this kind of stuff, even with the Russian thing, where they actually did the opposite thing, where they actually sent the signal and they made it count down. And this whole deal where it says launch, where it looks like it's launched, and these poor officers are inside there, absolutely petrified that they've launched a nuclear missile. And then they contact and they find, no, it hasn't launched. This is signaling. This is just basically saying, you got to quit doing this, rather than coming in here and trying to tell us. They're doing this indirect signaling, and you see it over and over again, where they will appear. The 2015 case, that with a video that was shown by To the Stars. Again, we heard this thing where this thing was there for a long time, that a number of people saw this thing, that it just kept being there and being there and being there. And so you can see in that area that it's they want us to see it. They want us to think. They're trying to get us to figure out what's going on, and they're doing it indirectly.
Sergeant Seps wants to know, why do you think some of the contactees are being trained on how to fly the ship?
I've only asked the one guy. We had the interview with Ron Johnson. That was the only guy I really asked. I remember the first woman that told me, it didn't make any sense. The first one told me it was 2013. I didn't know any of this stuff was going on till then. And that was when she said, and she was like a woman in her 70s. And when she told me she was flying the ship, and she told me a lot of weird stuff, remote viewing, experiencer, all this kind of stuff. And nothing really set me off. But when she said she was flying the ship, it doesn't make any sense. I was saying, they let you fly the ship? I couldn't believe it. It didn't make any sense. It was like you rob a bank, and then on the way out, you grab the teller and she drives the getaway car. I mean, it doesn't make sense. Why would you allow people to fly the ship? So the only one I actually asked was Ron Johnson. And I said to Ron, on this interview that's up now, we did it a couple of weeks ago, I said, well, why are they allowing you to fly the ship? And he said, well, I'm a pilot. I'm moving people off the planet. And this may go back to this whole thing where I got involved with writing the book Tuned In, where I was told to look at the song After the Gold Rush by Neil Young, where at the end of the song, the lyrics go where the silver seeds, the flying saucers are coming and they're taking the chosen ones to a new home in the sun, which is this whole deal. Or there may just be teaching us the whole thing of telepathy, because a lot of people will report as young kids being in a room where they're levitating balls, red, white, blue balls. One is easy, one is harder, one is very hard. And so the question there again is, why are they teaching people to levitate balls? All this kind of stuff. They seem to be training experiencers to do a lot of mental type stuff. And or it may just be to bring the message back to someone like me who now has 50 people to fly the ship. Because the important part isn't so much why they're allowing people to fly the ship. The important part is that you fly the ship with your mind, and 50 out of 50 people will tell me that. Nobody has told me anything different. And you can even go back and look at stuff like Cat Stevens, who was this famous musician in the 1970s who talked about his abduction experience. And he said he wrote a song called Freezing Steel. I was on the house of freezing steel, the house without the guiding wheel. There is no wheel. It's flown with the mind. That's the important part, that the UFO phenomena is a lot more mental, a lot more consciousness related than we think it is. It's not as nuts and bolts. And it's going to be something that's going to defy vast majority of stuff we've learned about the sort of, we have it as a random meaningless universe that's all nuts and bolts. What this is clearly showing us from flying the ship is, no, that's not quite true.
Trevor Zamowski wants to know what you think To the Stars Academy's next step is.
It sounds like, well, their main step is to get financing, is to get recognition from the Congress. And I've looked at what they've done, and I said, what I said they were doing is they'd fired the UFO community. It was evident that they really didn't want to talk to me or podcasts. A lot of podcast people are saying, well, how come I can't get an interview with this guy? And it became apparent they really were not interested. They're not trying to convince you and I. They really don't care what we think. We should know what's going on already. What they were trying to do is they were trying to move the people in the public. So you have, say, 40% believe it, 60% don't believe it. And what they're trying to do is shift it. And I would guarantee you that they shifted the public attitude towards UFOs, that probably another 10% of people suddenly said, oh, wow, this thing's for real. If it's in the New York Times, it's for real. And that's all they wanted to do, is to shift it. And then the message was being put to Congress. And they're using the threat thing. The Russians might have this, Chinese might have it, the aliens might be bad guys. You need to do something. We need funding. So I think that's the main thing that they're doing. And it sounds like they've got some sort of success. Some people are saying they have $500 million already. I'm not sure about that. That a lot of Congress people are paying attention. So that's one thing they're doing. The other thing that they are apparently going to do is they're putting out people like Hal Puthoff. And Hal Puthoff has probably one of the longest top secret SCI clearances in the United States. And he has now come public. He has never talked about UFOs. He talked about remote viewing. And he stated in his speech in Las Vegas that now that this thing is being released, I'm allowed to sort of talk about it. And what he told Jan Hartson, we have the mathematics. We now understand the mathematics that's involved to create how to fly this thing. So you're going to see that there's this story that they have this piece of metal, this layered piece of metal, and that when you hit it with terahertz, it will sort of make the piece float, and the time moves slower across the top of the piece. Apparently, they're going to show this experiment. Elizondo has said, and Jan Hartson has also said, but he hasn't explained what he was told, is that within the next year, something major. And I would say it has to be this piece of metal, that they're going to show this piece of metal, and that will turn a lot of heads if they show this thing levitating, or the fact that it wasn't made on Earth, that we don't have this kind of stuff, and it comes out from major figures. So what they're doing is they're putting in Elizondo, Hal Puthoff, all these major figures who are able to go into classified briefings with Congress and explain to Congress, and that's what they're trying to do. And I think they're fairly successful at what they've done. Those would be the next two things: the congressional thing, where they're trying to get Congress to give some money for this kind of stuff, and this what appears to be some sort of disclosure thing on the metal.
Okay, do you want two more?
Two more.
All right. Do you have any new information on Bob Bigelow from Trevor Zumowski?
Bob Bigelow is basically saying nothing. He's sort of in the background. That's his role. The only thing that I sort of have heard, and that is that he's funding. Which is he funding? It might be the Experiencer program. There's money, because one of the things was, no, it may not be Experiencer program. Don't quote me on that. He's still involved, but he's in the background. What they have done, and some of the people that I've talked to that sort of have interacted with some of these people, is that they're using these other people up front, that the pilots, Lou Elizondo, George Knapp, these people are doing a lot of the talking. Bob has sat in the background. What's important to remember about Bob is his background, not so much about what he's got now. But I always like to point out to people that you got to remember that this whole AATIP thing started not with UFOs, as has now been pointed out, but with Skinwalker Ranch. And that was the whole paranormal aspect, which what I say is the key to this whole thing. It's the consciousness thing. It's this portal at Skinwalker Ranch, all this bizarre thing with this sentient phenomena that knows what you're doing and this kind of stuff. And it moved to UFOs. So you have his background in the fact that Skinwalker Ranch, he actually got this thing motivated by these DIA people going to Skinwalker Ranch. And the fact that a lot of people don't realize, he got all the Carpenter files, the abduction files. He got all the MUFON files. He got all sorts of files from foreign governments. And the most important thing that I always say that you have to realize with Bob is he realizes the consciousness phenomena. Everybody knows that he put a lot of money in UFOs. Most people don't know that he put in $3.7 million into a chair at the University of Las Vegas, Nevada, for consciousness studies. He knows what this thing is based, that it's based on consciousness. This is a key component. So I would say you're not going to hear much from Bob in the background. He's a guy who, until a couple of years ago, nobody even had a photograph of this guy. He is very camera shy. He wants to be able to walk around and be an average guy. He doesn't want to be a star on TV and stuff like that. He's working in the background. And one of the things I think I pointed out in an interview I was doing last night is interesting to know about Bigelow is this whole thing about the secret space program. Is there a secret space program? Do we have this very advanced technology that's flying to the stars and we're trading with other star systems? And it just gets really elaborate. And the one thing I would point out about Bob Bigelow, as well as Joe Firmage and Elon Musk and all these people, if there's a secret space program and all this stuff, why is Bob Bigelow building little pods, expandable pods to put on Mars? Why is Elon Musk building rockets? Why is Joe Firmage trying to levitate a box, spend $100 million trying to levitate a box 1 inch off the ground? It would appear to me that we may not have all the technology that people are claiming we have, because how could Bob Bigelow miss this? Why would he still be going down this other route if we have all this material already? I can see you and I being deceived. You and I don't know what's going on, but Bob Bigelow has all sorts of high-level intelligence and government contracts. So does Musk. So does Joe Firmage. And I can't see that these people would be deceived. They would just buy into something out of the black world and go down a different path. The fact that they are still working on this very minor technology indicates to me we may not have all the stuff we're claiming that we have, and that we're flying this stuff around and this secret space program type thing. Okay.
Okay, last one.
Last one.
MacArthur Louis Saint asks, what about space-time metric propulsion and free energy technology?
One thing I would say is it's all free energy. Hydra's free, solar's free. Bringing it to the public may cost a little bit, and I don't think anything will be different with this. Is that it's all free energy. It's the equipment that you're going to need to tap it into our systems. The same guys that run all the other stuff are going to run this. I say be careful what you wish for. I have great reservations about the free energy thing. It's almost like we're into this materialistic paradigm where we really don't care about the consciousness aspects, the spiritual aspects. What are they doing here? What's really going on? All we want them to do is land on the White House lawn, drop off the damn toys, and then get lost. And we want the free energy. And I say, be careful what you wish for, because if we get the economy going at 20%, if we get free energy, and we suddenly put on twice as many cars onto the LA freeway because we have free energy and we can drive for nothing, everything is neutral in the universe. So it's not like if we get free energy, suddenly all the poor people are going to be fed. It's the same thing as everything else. It's neutral. We can use it for good or we can use it for bad. And I think we get sidetracked by being sort of in the Western world where all we want is, we've got 2 cars, we got a big house, we got 2 kids, everything's going along great, and now we need something new. So we need free energy. It's almost like during the 19th century where all the rich people used to have seances. You need some entertainment, you need something new to do, so we bring in a medium and we have seances. And the UFO, unfortunately, is starting to become like we need this for some more toys, for some entertainment and stuff. And I think we miss the bigger implications of why are they here? Why did they appear in World War II after we detonated atomic bomb? What about the messages that are being given to experiences and stuff like that? As to the space-time stuff, it appears to me that they have this material. As to space-time, if you look at quantum physics, is there actually space and is there actually time? Is just because you can use the word space-time, the fabric of space-time, it doesn't mean there's a fabric in space-time. We sort of turn it into a material object. I think it's still all going to be one. It's going to be this popping in, popping out. Everything's connected. That is, to me, is the number one message that they're bringing out. That was what Ben Rich told Jan Hartson when Jan said, how did they get here? He said, what do you know about ESP? Jan said, does that mean everything in time and space is connected? And he said, that's how it works. That is how it works. It's all one thing. And I think that's the more important thing to remember. But as I pointed out, it does appear, and Hal Puthoff, I've known Hal Puthoff for a number of years, and Hal Puthoff is, to me, as straight as can be. What Hal Puthoff says, he's an honest man who's trying to figure this thing out. When Jan Hartson says that Hal Puthoff told him, we now have the mathematics behind how they move this thing around, and now all we have to do is build the craft. I believe that's true. I believe they have the mathematics. That's what Ben Rich said. We've discovered the mistake in the equation. We now have the technology to take ET home. It's not going to take a lifetime to do it. Didn't mean they had the technology, that they had built the stuff. It's not going to take a lifetime to do, but it's going to take an act of God to get this thing out of Congress because it's so deep black. It's so classified. So yes, I believe they got the technology. I think the person you should ask that question to is Hal Puthoff. And apparently Hal Puthoff will be taking questions, but Hal Puthoff can explain this. He and Eric Davis have put out all these papers. They've got all these papers back from various experts in these fields. I believe they've made great strides. And so when Helputov says they've got the mathematics as to how this, the tic-tac thing was moving around and how it moves, how it's being propelled, the physics behind it, I absolutely believe that's true. Okay, thanks a lot. Escape. Okay. And we will do another, we're going to do a little question and answer thing, which will be up in a couple of days for different questions that people have put out.